It was a Friday night in February, minus 23 outside, and I was alone on my bathroom floor, wondering if I was going to die there. I'm 31 years old. My name is Simone Albright, and I need to tell you what happened the night my body gave out, because it changed everything I thought I understood about who my family actually was. I'd been feeling wrong for 2 days. Not dramatically wrong, just the kind of off that you explain away because you have a full-time job and a caseload that doesn't care how you feel. I work as a social worker for a community mental health organization in Hamilton, Ontario, which is its own particular kind of exhausting. So when I noticed the pain in my lower right abdomen on Wednesday, I chalked it up to stress. I drank peppermint tea. I put a heating pad on it. I went to bed. By Thursday, it was sharper. Still, I told myself I'd make a doctor's appointment on Monday. That's the specific stupidity of someone who spends all day telling other people to prioritize their health. You convince yourself the rules don't apply to you. Or maybe you just don't have the bandwidth to apply them to yourself. Either way, I waited. Friday evening, I came home from work, made myself a bowl of pasta I barely touched, and sat on the couch feeling increasingly like something inside me was tightening. By 9 o'clock, I was in bed. By 10, I was sweating through my sheets. By 11:30, I was on the floor of my bathroom, both arms wrapped around the toilet. Not because I was nauseated, but because it was the only solid thing I could reach. The pain was not like anything I had felt before. It wasn't the sharp, acute kind that comes and goes. It was a pressure, deep, insistent, almost territorial, like something had decided to occupy a space inside my body and was not going to be reasoned with. I tried to stand up and my legs wouldn't hold me properly. I slid back down to the tile. I want to address something right now because I know it's the first thing people ask. Why didn't I call 911? And the honest answer is this. I grew up in a household where ambulances were for other people. Not because my family was heartless, or at least not in ways I understood yet, but because my mother had drilled into us from childhood that an ambulance ride in this country still costs money. The towing fees, the out-of-province gaps, the things provincial health insurance doesn't always cover cleanly. And more than that, she had always been the kind of woman who said, "Call us first, we'll take you." That's what family is for. I had internalized that so completely that even lying on a cold bathroom floor at midnight, it didn't occur to me to dial 911. It occurred to me to call my mother. I called her 4 times. Each time it rang out to voicemail. Her voicemail message is chirpy and warm, the kind of voice she uses for people she's trying to impress. I listened to it 4 times and left 2 messages. The second one I'm not proud of. I was crying. I said, "Mum, please. I think something is really wrong. I need someone to come." Then I called my older brother. He's 34, lives about 25 minutes from me, owns a house in Ancaster with his wife and their 2 kids. I called him 3 times. On the 3rd call, he picked up. He sounded annoyed before I said a word. I told him I was on the bathroom floor. I told him I couldn't stand properly. I told him the pain had been building for 2 days and I was scared. There was a pause and then he said, "Have you tried Tylenol?" I told him I'd taken Tylenol 3 hours ago. Another pause. He said, "Sim, it's almost midnight. The kids just went down. Can this wait until morning?" I didn't say anything for a moment. I was trying to decide if I was being dramatic. That's the other thing nobody tells you about being in serious physical pain. Part of your brain keeps running this quiet background check, asking, "Are you sure? Are you sure this isn't just anxiety? Are you sure you're not exaggerating?" It's maddening. I told him I didn't think it could wait until morning. He said he'd call me back. He didn't call back. I called my mother 4 more times. I called my brother 2 more times. I was sitting with my back against the bathtub at this point, knees pulled up, phone balanced on my knee, watching the screen go dark between calls. The apartment was quiet in that particular way that only feels loud when you're frightened. The radiator was ticking. I could hear the wind outside. Somewhere in the building above me, someone was watching television. By my 12th call, I know it was 12 because I checked later, standing in the hospital, going through my call log like I was reading evidence. I had stopped leaving messages. I didn't have the air for it. The pain had moved. Or maybe it had escalated. I'm not medically trained, but something had shifted. And whatever was happening in my body was no longer something I could negotiate with mentally. It was my downstairs neighbor who saved my life. Her name is Florence, and she is 62 years old, recently retired from 30 years as a high school librarian, and she lives directly below my unit. We have one of those neighborly relationships that is warm, but not particularly deep. We wave in the lobby. We've had 1 glass of wine on the front steps in 3 years. She waters my plants when I go home for holidays. I had not given her my phone number. I had not given her any reason to think of me as someone she was responsible for, but Florence told me later that she heard a sound through her ceiling that she described as not right. She said it wasn't a bang or a crash. She's used to the ordinary sounds of someone living above her. She said it was more like the absence of normal sound combined with something intermittent she couldn't name. She stood in her bedroom listening for about 10 minutes and then called the building superintendent. He wasn't answering. So she called 911 herself, told them she was worried about her upstairs neighbor, and gave them my unit number. I remember the paramedics knocking. I remember not being able to get to the door. I remember one of them saying something through the door about being able to hear me, and then the super must have come because the door opened. And there were two of them crouching down to where I was, which was back on the bathroom floor by that point. What happened after that I know partly from memory and partly from what I was told. My appendix had burst. Not was in the process of bursting, had already burst, possibly several hours earlier. The paramedic who treated me on the way to the hospital, a calm young man who kept talking to me in this measured, deliberate voice, told me later that the level of infection already present suggested it had ruptured sometime in the early evening. I had been walking around, making pasta, sitting on my couch, going to bed with a ruptured appendix. Because I had been waiting for something bad enough to justify making a fuss. I was in emergency surgery within 40 minutes of arriving at Hamilton General. On the table, I coded. My heart stopped. I know this the way you know things that happen to your body while you were not in it. Secondhand, clinical, slightly unreal. The surgical team brought me back. They told me afterward with the careful, practiced calm of people who have done this before. I asked if it had been dangerous. The surgeon, a woman named Dr. Okafor, looked at me with patient, tired eyes and said, "You were quite sick." I woke up in the recovery room sometime on Saturday morning. My first clear thought was to ask if my family had come. The nurse, a young man named, I think, Tyler, looked at his chart and told me that my emergency contact had been called. He said that someone had indeed come to the hospital. He started to say something else and then paused, and I remember his expression, which was the expression of someone choosing their words. He said, "There's also a gentleman in the waiting room who asked us to let him know when you were awake. He's not family." But he asked specifically. I had no idea what that meant. A few minutes later, Dr. Okafor came in. She pulled a chair close to my bed and sat down, which I recognized immediately as the posture of someone who is not in a hurry, because what she has to say requires stillness. She told me I had come through surgery well. She told me there would be a recovery period of several weeks. She told me I should not plan to return to work for a minimum of 4 weeks, and that she was going to have the social work team come speak with me. And I almost laughed at that, which tells you I was feeling slightly better about aftercare supports. And then she said, "I want to tell you about something that happened while you were in surgery." She told me that a woman identifying herself as my mother had come to the hospital in the early morning hours. She had spoken with the staff at the nursing station on the surgical floor. She had been told I was in surgery, that I was critical, that I could not receive visitors. She had then asked whether she could speak to someone about the discharge process, how long I would need to be kept, what the steps were, whether there was any possibility of expediting my release. She was told that given my condition, I would be in hospital for a minimum of 5 to 7 days post-surgery. My mother's response, according to the nurse who had the conversation, was to ask whether she could sign something to accept responsibility and take me home earlier, because, and I want to make sure I say this correctly, the family had a cottage reservation starting Sunday, up near Perry Sound. That was non-refundable. I lay there in my hospital bed with tubes still in my arm, and I tried to understand those words. A non-refundable cottage reservation. Dr. Okafor told me that my mother had eventually left without signing anything, because there was nothing to sign. The decision wasn't hers to make. She told me this with no editorial comment, which I appreciated. She's a doctor. She was telling me facts. The editorializing I could do myself later when I had more strength. She stood up to leave and then said, almost as an afterthought, "The man in the waiting room, he asked to see you when you were up to it." He mentioned he'd spoken with the billing desk as well. She left. I asked Tyler to send him in. The man who came through the door was somewhere around 60. He was stocky, broad in the shoulders, with gray at his temples, and the kind of tan that comes from actual outdoor work rather than a vacation. He was wearing a dark green fleece over a flannel shirt. He had a Tim Hortons paper cup in one hand that he seemed to have forgotten he was holding. He looked, I thought, like someone's hockey dad. like someone who coaches minor league and knows every kid's name. He came in slowly, like he wasn't sure he had the right to be there. He sat down in the chair beside my bed and put the Tim's cup on the floor. He introduced himself as Raymond Bauer. He said his friends called him Ray. He told me he'd been at the hospital since about 3 in the morning. His father, 81 years old, admitted 2 days earlier with pneumonia, was on the respiratory floor 2 levels up. Ray had come back in the middle of the night because his father had taken a turn, and he'd been sitting in the family waiting room near the nursing station when my mother arrived. He said she wasn't quiet about it. He said she had come in speaking loudly, with the confidence of someone who expects accommodation. He heard her tell the nurse that she was there for her daughter, that she'd been in the middle of something and needed this handled quickly. He heard her ask about discharge. He heard her mention the cottage. He said the nurse had been professional and patient. He said the nurse had explained, carefully and more than once, that I was in critical condition, that my surgery had only recently concluded, that the outcome was not yet fully certain, and that discharge was not a conversation that was medically appropriate to have yet. He said my mother responded to all of that by asking for a supervisor. The supervisor came, had the same conversation. My mother left. No one went to sit with me. Ray said he sat in that waiting room for a long time after she left, thinking. He has a daughter, he told me. She's 28. She lives in Vancouver. He said he kept thinking about what it would feel like for her to be in a hospital bed, post-surgery, coated on the table, and have nobody sitting in the chairs that were 4 floors directly below her. He went to the nurse's station quietly and asked if the young woman from the emergency surgery. He'd heard enough to know the general situation, had anyone with her. The nurse couldn't share details, but she didn't have to. Ray said the answer was written in the way she didn't answer. He went to the billing desk. He asked carefully whether there was anything creating a barrier to my care. In Ontario, OHIP covers the core of hospital care, but there are gaps, certain medications, certain equipment, certain administrative holds that can slow the process when supplemental insurance has lapses or when a patient has recently changed coverage. I had switched jobs 8 months ago. My benefits had a 90-day waiting period, and while most of my care was covered, there was a specific flag on my file related to a medication I'd need post-surgery. It was a few $100s. Not a crisis for most people, but on a Friday night into Saturday morning, it was creating friction. An administrative hold that would slow down one element of my aftercare. Ray paid it. He gave them his credit card, he told me, and he didn't ask for anything back. I looked at him. I couldn't speak for a moment, which almost never happens to me. He said he hoped that was okay. He said it in this straightforward way, not like he was expecting thanks, not like he was performing generosity, but like he was mentioning he'd picked up a fallen grocery bag. Matter of fact, just something you do. I started to cry. Not politely, not quietly. The kind of crying that bypasses your permission and comes out of something underneath. He didn't look uncomfortable. He didn't try to stop me or say it was fine. He just waited with his hands on his knees, like crying was a reasonable thing that made sense to wait through. When I could speak again, I asked him why. He looked at me for a moment and then said, I've sat with my dad a lot of nights up there. I know what it looks like when someone's alone and not supposed to be. That was it. That was all he said. He visited his father that day and came back to check on me in the afternoon. He brought his wife on Sunday, a soft-spoken woman named Carol, who took one look at me and started asking whether I had food at home, whether I had someone who could pick up prescriptions, whether I had any support lined up for when I was discharged. She had the precise energy of a woman who has spent her life solving practical problems and finds comfort in continuing to solve them. I found it immensely calming. On Monday, my family came. My mother arrived first. She came in with the energy of someone who had been inconvenienced and was managing it graciously. She was dressed nicely, hair done, like she'd fit this visit into a morning of errands. She kissed me on the cheek and said it had been quite a scare. She said she'd been worried sick. She sat in the chair by the window and told me about the cottage, the drive up, the lake, how cold it still was, but the kids had loved it anyway. She said it was a shame I'd missed it. I watched her talk. I didn't say much. She noticed the arrangement on the windowsill. Carol had brought flowers on Sunday, yellow tulips, the kind that smell faintly sweet even in a hospital room. My mother asked where they'd come from. I said a friend. She said, oh, that's nice, and moved on and never asked which friend, or how a friend had known to come while she hadn't. My brother arrived about 40 minutes later. He was apologetic in the specific way that people are apologetic when they want credit for the apology, without wanting to discuss the thing they're apologizing for. He said he felt terrible about Friday night. He said he thought I was being anxious. I have a history of health anxiety from about 5 years ago, which is apparently now a permanent caveat that gets applied to anything I say about my body. He said he should have come. He said he was sorry. I said you should have come. He nodded. He didn't say anything else about it. They stayed about an hour. When they left, my mother hugged me carefully around the tubes and said to let her know if I needed anything. And they walked out into the hallway, and I listened to their footsteps fade toward the elevator. I lay there and I thought, in a very quiet, very clear way that felt less like a decision, and more like the settling of something that had already been decided without me. I am done managing their comfort at the expense of my own clarity. I have spent 31 years finding ways to make excuses that fit the shape of who they are, rather than confronting what that shape actually looks like. I called my mother 17 times. No, 12. It was 12, but 12 was also enough. On the worst night of my life, and she had her phone and didn't answer, and when she came to the hospital, her first question was about the discharge timeline, and her concern was a cottage deposit. My brother, who lives 25 minutes away, asked if I'd tried Tylenol and went back to sleep. The person who came was a 60-year-old man whose name I didn't know, who was there for his own father, who had no reason whatsoever to extend himself in my direction. He paid a bill that wasn't his to pay. He sat in a waiting room through the night. He came back. He brought his wife. He checked on me. Ray came to see me once more before I was discharged. He brought his father, who had, thank God, turned a corner and was stable enough to walk slowly with a cane, and the old man, whose name was Albert, sat in the chair and told me a long story about a fishing trip in 1987 that I'm not entirely sure had a point, and it was one of the best 20 minutes of my entire hospital stay. Before Ray left that last time, I asked him if he'd done anything else, beyond paying the bill, beyond coming to check on me. He paused, and I could tell he hadn't planned to mention it. He said he had filed a report with the hospital's patient advocate office. He said what my mother had done, attempting to discuss discharge options on behalf of a critical, unconsenting patient, was worth documenting. He said he'd given a written account of what he'd heard at the nursing station, and that the patient advocate had taken it seriously. He hadn't told me. He just did it. He wasn't looking for credit. He wasn't building towards something. He did it because it was the right thing to do, and that was apparently the only reason he needed. I've been home for 3 weeks now. I'm recovering well, walking without pain, eating normally, slowly working through the backlog of case notes from my leave. I have a follow-up with Dr. Okafor next week, and she seems cautiously pleased. My relationship with my mother and my brother is something I'm still sorting through. I haven't ended contact. I haven't made any dramatic declarations. But the fog I've lived inside of, the comfortable blur where I could tell myself they just had a different way of showing love, that this was just how our family worked, that I was probably expecting too much, that fog has burned off completely. What's left underneath is just the clear, cold shape of what's actually there. Ray and Carol have become people I have dinner with. That's new, and it's a little unusual, and I don't entirely know what to call it yet. Carol texts me recipes sometimes. Ray sent me an article last week about community mental health funding cuts in Ontario because he'd remembered what I do for work, and I found that so unexpectedly touching that I had to sit with it for a minute. Last week, Carol said to me, over pasta at their kitchen table, "You know, you don't have to earn your place at this table. You just show up. That's enough." I've been in this work long enough to know the theory of chosen family. I've used the concept with clients. I've explained its validity, its legitimacy, its research-backed importance. I thought I understood it. I didn't understand it the way I understand it now. The night my appendix burst, I called the people I was supposed to call and they didn't come. The person who came was someone who had no script, no obligation, no history with me. Just a set of eyes that recognized something wrong, and a character that wouldn't let him walk past it. That's not a small thing. I've been turning it over for weeks now and I can't make it small. If you've ever called for someone in a dark moment and heard nothing back, I want you to hear this. The quiet is not a verdict on your worth. It is only information about where you were looking. The people who are actually yours, some of them are still out there, and they'll surprise you. They show up not because they have to, but because something in them simply cannot do otherwise. And the ones who didn't come, they showed you something real too. The hardest part isn't being angry about it. The hardest part is letting the truth of it land without softening it into something easier to carry. I'm learning to let it land.